In Hollywood, there is a very specific kind of failure. Not the kind where a movie bombs and everyone moves on. The specific kind where the industry decides, collectively and with considerable confidence, that a person is finished, that whatever they had has been used up, or squandered, or simply outlasted its moment and proceeds to construct. In the trade press and the award season narratives and the quiet conversations in development meetings, the story of a person whose best years are behind them. Hollywood did this to Kevin Costner twice. The first time was in the early 1990s after Waterworld and The Postman, two expensive, ambitious films that became the industry's shorthand for hubris. The cautionary tale told at dinner parties when someone needed an example of a filmmaker who had confused commercial success with creative infallibility. The second time was in the 2010s, when the film career had contracted to the point where the roles were smaller and the headlines were mostly gossip, and the general consensus in the industry was that Kevin Costner, the man who had won 2 Academy Awards and made some of the most beloved American films of the past 40 years, was a nostalgia item. And then came Yellowstone. And then came something else, something private and painful and public, in ways he did not choose, that revealed, more clearly than any film ever had, what Kevin Costner was actually made of. Have you ever been publicly written off, not by strangers, but by the people and the institutions whose opinion of you have spent your entire career trying to earn, and found, in the writing off, something that clarified rather than diminished who you actually were? That is not a question about Hollywood. It is the question at the center of Kevin Costner's story. And the answer is one of the more quietly remarkable things in American popular culture. It is 2023. The set of Yellowstone, somewhere in the landscape of the American West. Kevin Costner is 68 years old. He is the lead actor and executive producer of the most watched cable television drama in American history. He is in the middle of a divorce from his wife of 18 years that is playing out in extraordinary detail in the tabloid press and the entertainment media and the social media platforms that have made private pain into a public spectacle in ways that no previous generation of celebrities has had to fully navigate. The divorce is also, simultaneously, a professional crisis. The production schedule of Yellowstone's 5th season is in conflict with a film project he has been developing for 30 years, a Western epic called Horizon, that he has been trying to get made since before most of the people watching Yellowstone were born. The conflict has become public. The relationship between Costner and the Yellowstone producers has deteriorated in ways that the entertainment press is covering with the particular appetite of an industry that enjoys watching its own power struggles. He is, at 68, navigating a divorce, a professional conflict, a tabloid media environment, and the production of his life's most personal project simultaneously. He does not appear to be panicking. This is not composure as performance. It is composure as character, the specific, earned steadiness of a man who has been through enough to know that the things that look like catastrophes often turn out to be clarifications. That the moments when everything is loud and complicated and public are sometimes the moments that reveal, most precisely, what you actually are. This story does not begin in 2023. It begins in Compton, California, in 1955, in a childhood that built the man before anyone had a context for what he was being built to become. Pull back far enough from the Academy Awards and the Yellowstone phenomenon and the tabloid coverage and the 30-year project finally arriving in theaters, and you find the beginning. Not the Hollywood origin story of the agent's call and the screen test and the overnight discovery. The actual beginning, with its specific geography and its specific formation and the particular qualities of character that Compton, California in the 1950s and 1960s was capable of producing. Kevin Michael Costner was born on January 18, 1955 in Linwood, California, and grew up primarily in Compton and Visalia cities in the California inland, working class and practical, the America that the film industry was built to tell stories about, rather than the America the film industry was built in. His father, Bill Costner, was a utility worker for Southern California Edison. His mother, Sharon, raised 3 children with the particular combination of structure and warmth that the best versions of working-class American motherhood have always required. The family was Methodist. church-going, the specific kind of middle American Protestant household where the values were not discussed abstractly, but practiced concretely, where you showed up, did the work, kept your word, and did not confuse the opinion of the room with the truth of the matter. Kevin was athletic and sociable, the kind of kid who was drawn to the outdoors and to water and to the particular freedom of the California landscape that, even in the suburbs, was never entirely domesticated. He sang in church choirs, he played sports, he was not, in any visible way, destined for anything in particular. He went to California State University, Fullerton, which is not a feeder school for Hollywood. He studied business and marketing and finance, which is not a curriculum designed to produce film actors. He played baseball. He was, by his own account, and by the accounts of people who knew him then, a perfectly ordinary young man who had not yet found the thing that was going to organize his life around itself. He found it in a film appreciation class. He has described this conversion experience, and it was a conversion experience, in the full sense of the word, with a specificity that suggests it genuinely reorganized his understanding of what was possible. He watched films in that class and understood, with the sudden and complete clarity that genuine vocations sometimes produce, that this was what he was going to do. Not as a career calculation. Not because it was practical. Because it was the thing. He graduated. He briefly took a marketing job. He lasted about 3 weeks before he quit and committed fully to acting. His father was not pleased. The Costner household had not been built around the values of artistic ambition, it had been built around the values of reliable work and practical outcomes. The conversation Kevin Costner had with his father about leaving a secure job to pursue acting was, by multiple accounts, difficult. He did it anyway. He was in his mid-20s. He was broke, unknown, living the specific existence of a young actor in Los Angeles who has committed to the thing before the thing has committed back the classes. The small parts, the headshots, the waiting. The sustained faith in something that does not yet have any objective justification. Have you ever committed to something completely not as a calculated risk, but as a declaration, a statement of identity? A decision that said, this is what I am, regardless of the current evidence before the world had given you any reason to believe it was going to work. That is the texture of Kevin Costner's early years in Los Angeles. Not the glamour of discovery. The specific, daily work of becoming something before being it. The ascent, when it came, was not gradual in the way that careers built from the bottom up tend to be. It was a series of specific moments that arrived at intervals and that each changed the scale of what was possible. The moment that changed everything not just for Costner, but for American cinema in the mid-1980s came with The Untouchables in 1987, when Brian De Palma cast him as Elliot Ness opposite Robert De Niro's Capone. The role required a specific quality of restraint. Ness was the straight line against which Capone's operatic excess was measured. The character who had to anchor an entire film while the more theatrical performance happened around him. He did it without disappearing. The restraint was itself a form of presence. But the role that established the specific quality he brought to the screen, the combination of physical ease and emotional containment that would define his best performances, had come a year earlier in Bull Durham. The baseball romance that Roger Ebert called one of the best sports movies ever made. There was something in Bull Durham that the industry took a long time to fully name. The character Costner played Crash Davis, the veteran catcher who knows everything about the game and who has been passed over for the career he deserved, was written and performed as a genuinely complicated man. Not complicated in the way of dramatic acting exercises. Complicated in the way of actual people whose intelligence and charm and vulnerability and frustration existed simultaneously, without one canceling the others. The character understood both his own value and the limits of what that value had produced. He was bitter without being cynical, resigned without being defeated. He could play the American man in a way that felt real, rather than constructed. This quality is rarer than it sounds. American cinema has never had a shortage of actors who can play strength convincingly, or vulnerability convincingly, or charm convincingly. The actors who can play the combination, who can make strength and vulnerability and charm feel like the same person, are much rarer. And the actors who can do it while standing in a field or on a ranch or against the backdrop of the American landscape, who can make the landscape part of the character rather than a backdrop behind the character, are rarer still. Costner was, and remains, singular in this. Field of Dreams came in 1989. Dances with Wolves came in 1990. He directed it, produced it, starred in it, a 3-hour Western in a decade when Westerns were supposed to be dead. A film that the industry expected to fail, and that won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. He was the first actor to win Best Director since Warren Beatty. He was 35 years old. JFK came in 1991. The Bodyguard came in 1992. And then Waterworld. And then The Postman. And then the narrative that Hollywood loves to construct about the person who flew too close to the sun, the narrative that is partly true, the films were failure, and partly the industry's way of managing talent that it no longer knows how to contain. The narrative was not fair. It was also not entirely wrong. The films were expensive, the failures were real, and the gap between Costner's vision of himself as a filmmaker and the industry's patience for that vision had been exposed. He did not disappear, he worked. He made good films. Open Range, which he directed in 2003, is one of the finest westerns of the modern era, a film about the code of honorable men in a landscape that does not reward honor. A film that knows exactly what it is and delivers it with complete conviction, and he made smaller ones, and he kept developing Horizon, and he kept showing up to the work even as the industry conversation about him became the conversation about a person whose moment had passed. The moment had not passed. It had been waiting. There is a version of Kevin Costner's story that Hollywood would tell with a certain comfortable schadenfreude, the arc of hubris and humbling. The cautionary tale of the star who overreached and paid the price and then found his way back to a kind of modest redemption. The version where Waterworld is the fall and Yellowstone is the rehabilitation. That version misses the point. The version underneath it is about a man who never stopped believing in the specific American story he had been trying to tell from the beginning, the story of the West, of the land, of the relationship between the individual and the landscape, and the particular values that the landscape produces. Horizon is not a project Kevin Costner took on because it was commercially smart. It is a project he has been trying to make for 30 years because it is the story he believes in most completely. The vision of American history that he thinks matters. The thing he is willing to bet his career and his money on, because the alternative not making it is not something he can accept. He financed significant portions of Horizon himself when studios wouldn't. He kept developing it through the Waterworld years and the Postman years, and the years when the industry had moved on and was not returning his calls with the speed or the enthusiasm of the 1990s. He kept working on it through the Yellowstone years, when the industry was newly interested in him again, and when the commercial leverage of being the lead of the most watched drama in cable television history was, finally, something he could use. He did not use it to secure a comfortable franchise extension. He used it to try to get Horizon made. Have you ever stayed attached to something, a vision, a project, a version of yourself you were trying to bring into the world for so long and through so many circumstances that most of the people around you had concluded you were simply not going to let it go? And found that the staying was not stubbornness but fidelity to the thing itself, to the story it was trying to tell, to the version of what you thought you could make if you just didn't stop? That is the 30-year relationship between Kevin Costner and Horizon. Not obsession. Fidelity, the biggest crisis in Kevin Costner's recent life, arrived not from a film failure, but from a marriage ending publicly, in the specific way that celebrity divorces in the social media era arrive simultaneously everywhere. Interpreted by people with no access to the facts, narrated by outlets whose business model requires the most dramatic possible version of events to be both the first version and the loudest. He and Christine Baumgartner had been married since 2004. They had 3 children together. The relationship had lasted 18 years. In May 2023, Christine filed for divorce. The specific details that the tabloid press seized on the disputes over the family home, the financial arrangements, the alleged conflicts between Costner's commitment to the Horizon project and his availability to his family were presented in the coverage as a portrait of a man who had prioritized his professional legacy over the people he loved. Whether that portrait was accurate is something that only the people inside the relationship could know. What was observable from the outside was that Kevin Costner, at 68 years old, was navigating one of the most difficult personal experiences available to a human being, while also navigating a professional conflict over Yellowstone, and while also completing principal photography on Horizon and American Saga. He did not stop working. He did not issue statements designed to manage the narrative at the expense of his own dignity or his children's privacy. He spoke, when he spoke, with a restraint that the moment did not require from him, but that he maintained anyway. He has said, in the limited interviews he gave during this period, that the most important thing to him was his children, that the noise of the divorce coverage was the noise, and that the children were the substance, and that keeping those two things clearly separated in his own mind was the most important thing he could do. There is a quality in the way Kevin Costner has handled the public exposure of his private pain that is, when you look at it directly, one of the more genuinely dignified things in recent American celebrity culture. He was not pretending the pain was small. He was not performing resilience for the cameras. He was simply, and with evident effort, keeping the things that were private in the private space where they belonged. His children were not ammunition. The work was not a distraction from the pain. It was the thing he knew how to do with the pain. Have you ever had something fall apart publicly, something important and private that the public had no right to, but consumed anyway, and found that the only response available to you that preserved anything was to keep working, to keep being the person you were committed to being? To refuse to let the noise reorganize your sense of what the substance was? That is what Kevin Costner demonstrated in 2023. Not heroism, not stoicism as performance. The specific, private, daily decision to put the important things first, even when the coverage was insisting on the drama of the less important things. The accounting of Kevin Costner's career requires more than a financial ledger. He has one of the most distinctive bodies of work in American film. The films he has directed, Dances with Wolves, Open Range, the first two Horizon films, represent a coherent artistic vision that has nothing to do with franchise safety or commercial predictability. He has consistently made films about the American West and the American past and the American character, with a seriousness and a fidelity to the landscape that no other figure working in mainstream American cinema has sustained across the same period. He is not a perfect filmmaker. Some of the films have not worked, but the failures are the failures of genuine ambition of someone who was trying to do something that was difficult and that mattered to him rather than the failures of miscalculation or hubris. The television work Yellowstone, its spin-offs, the franchise it created reached an audience that the films of the last 20 years had not. More than 10 million people watched Yellowstone's Season 5 premiere. The show became the most watched cable drama in the history of American television. It introduced Kevin Costner to an entirely new generation of viewers who then went back and discovered Field of Dreams and Bull Durham and Dances with Wolves and The Bodyguard and every other piece of a career that had been building for 40 years. The central irony of Kevin Costner's career is this: the man who was written off twice by an industry that confused his silence with absence and his loyalty to a vision with stubbornness turned out to have been building, all along, a body of work that required the whole career to understand. The films that looked like failures in the 1990s are now understood as the failures of ambition. The silence of the 2000s was development. The Yellowstone years were not a comeback. They were the world finally catching up. In 2026, Kevin Costner is 71 years old. He lives on his ranch in Aspen, Colorado, the land that has been the center of his private life for decades, the landscape that has informed everything he has made, the place that his children know as home even through the disruption of the divorce years. He is present in his children's lives with the specific, deliberate, public commitment of a man who understands that being a father is not a role you play in the years when it is convenient. Horizon and American Saga continues. The first two films have been released. The third is in development. He has said he intends to make all four. Whether the theatrical model survives the economics of contemporary film distribution to allow all four to reach audiences as he intends is a question the industry is watching. He is not watching. He is making the films. He has spoken about the post-divorce chapter of his life with a quiet directness that suggests he has done the internal work that the chapter required. He has said that the experience clarified what mattered and what didn't, that the things that survived the clarification were the things that were always real, and that the things that didn't survive were perhaps always going to end. He has not been photographed in crisis. He has not been seen in the specific public performance of recovery that the celebrity media cycle expects and rewards. He has simply, over the past 2 years, continued to show up to his work, to his children, to the landscape that has always been his most honest mirror. There is something quietly extraordinary about that a man of 71. Living on a ranch in Colorado, finishing the film he started developing before the internet existed, showing up for his children through the noise of a tabloid divorce, and still, after 40 years in an industry that has written him off twice, making the specific American stories that he has always believed were worth making. Kevin Costner's story is not a story about Hollywood. It is not a story about Academy Awards, or box office failures, or the Yellowstone ratings, or the tabloid divorce coverage, or the 30-year development of Horizon that may or may not resolve in the way he has always imagined. It is a story about the specific quality of fidelity that is required to sustain a vision across a career through the periods when the industry is interested and the periods when it isn't, through the personal triumphs and the professional disasters, through the marriages and the divorces and the children growing up and the landscape of the work shifting in ways that nobody can predict from. Inside the middle of it, it is a story about what it looks like when someone decides, very early, that the work they want to do is more important than the career that work will produce, and then spends 40 years finding out whether that decision holds up under the full weight of a life. It holds up. Not perfectly, not without cost, not in the way that the success narrative suggests, where the fidelity is vindicated cleanly and the vision is delivered intact and the Hollywood ending arrives on schedule. In the way that real things hold up damaged in some places, stronger than expected in others, different from what it looked like at the beginning, and still, unmistakably, the thing it was always trying to be. What are you still faithful to in the way that Kevin Costner has been faithful to the American West, to the story he has always wanted to tell, even when the evidence has been complicated and the industry has moved on and the people around you have started to use the word stubborn where they once used the word committed? Leave that in the comments. Because that question is not about a film career. It is about the work you have decided is worth doing regardless of what the room decides about it. If this story moved something in, you leave a like. 1 second. It means this reaches someone who is still in the middle of the work and needs to know the fidelity is worth it. Subscribe. More stories like this are coming, careers that required the whole length of them to understand. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing from Kevin Costner's story that you carry forward? Because the most important film Kevin Costner ever made was not the one that won the Academy Awards. It was the one he kept developing for 30 years when nobody was waiting for it. That film is what fidelity looks like in practice. We'll be back.